welcome to Deep Treks. I'm Dan Shipton, and it is Thursday. I first of all want to thank you for sticking with us yesterday. I know it was a longer study, but sometimes when we get digging into the Word, it takes us a little longer to get to the truth, and I wanted us to really dig in yesterday. Today we're going to be in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and we're going to focus down in verses 9 to 12. Today's focus is also going to be on deception. I know Tuesday we talked about deception, but today we're going on a different part of deception because it's talking about how in the end times people will be deceived. And so let's look at the verses and let's dig into the word today. So 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, beginning at verse 9, says, "The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs, and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and to be saved. For this reason, God sends them a powerful delusion, so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed in the truth, but have delighted in wickedness." So what can we learn from this passage? Well, first of all, we can learn several things. One of the things we can learn is evil, and the evil one, has always used a sort of deception to attack people of the world. We talked yesterday about the fact that people want to ignore that there's a spiritual battle that's been going on, but the truth is, the Bible talks about it over and over again. The evil one, since the beginning of time, has been trying to corrupt humanity. Go back to the garden and you look at Adam and Eve, and they were deceived by Satan. They were deceived not because Satan came through and gave them a blatant, outright lie, but he twisted the truth. He twisted the truth, saying things like, did God really say you were going to die? Did God say not to touch the fruit? You see, he took the laws that God had given and he extended them, which is what humans do today. If you look at the Old Testament law in the time of Jesus, when he comes along, they've taken that law and they've multiplied it. They've made it worse. They've made it terrible. They've added on hundreds and hundreds of things to define what the Sabbath and other things are. So they've corrupted the law by making it more than what God ever said it was. That's what the evil one likes to do. Another thing that I'm reminded of when I think of this passage is the fact that it's talking about being tempted to be deceived and falling into wickedness and all these other things. And I'm reminded that James tells us in James chapter 1, verse 13 to 15, when we are tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted, but each one in his own temptation by his own evil desire is dragged away and enticed. So when we come to a passage like this and we read this, it says that they will be deceived. We have to realize first and foremost, the evil one has always been deceiving, but we allow ourselves to be deceived because we desire evil. Now, that doesn't sound like a great thing, I know, but the truth of the matter is, it is a fact. People desire to stay evil. It's a human nature of the fallen man versus the perfected man that Adam was before the fall. Now that we've allowed sin into our life, we're bent towards sin. All you got to do is look at little children and they will argue with one another. They will beat up on one another. They will steal from one another. These are all indications of sin in our lives. We're not naturally prone to do good. We're naturally prone to sin. So we have to also ask ourselves when we come to this passage, because it talks in verse 12 there, 11, sorry, it says, God sends them a powerful delusion. Does God delude people? We've said the evil one goes out and he desires to, disrupt our thoughts and things like that and deceive us. But does God delude people? When you read about God, who's supposed to be perfect, outside of failure, outside of sin, delusion seems like a sinful thing to do to someone. And the truth of the matter is, it's a misinterpretation of how we read this in English. The short answer to all of this is no, God does not delude people. The longer answer is, in English, this probably is misinterpreted and doesn't really mean delusion. It basically means God lets people onto their own delusions and desires. Now, notice the difference there. We read it and say God deludes the people in this passage, but it actually in Greek means God lets them into their own delusion and desire. In other words, they want to be deceived. They want to believe this false truth that this Antichrist is the guy that's going to save them. They want to believe in his signs and wonders. They want to believe that sin is okay. You know, in Mark chapter 4, verse 10 to 12, Jesus quotes Isaiah and says, everyone hearing and never listening to the truth. That's kind of a deluded person. They can hear the truth, but they don't want to listen and make it change in their life. He's clear about this. Paul is clear in Romans chapter 1. If you go back and read that, and I encouraged you that yesterday, I encourage you again, sometimes spend some time in Romans chapter 1. It talks about people ignoring the evidence that God has wrath coming for those that are doing evil. And instead, they keep going on their own desires. And God finally says, go ahead on your own desires. Like a parent who has warned their child not to do something over and over, God finally says, you're going to do it? Go ahead. Be that way. Leaves them to their own desires. He's tried to save them. He's given us the Bible. He's given us truth, and people just choose to ignore it. So God allows those rejecting truth to stay in their choice so that their condemnation is justified. Notice what verse 12 there says. Let's go back there for a second. And so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth, but have delighted in wickedness. In other words, he allows them to stay in their delusion because they have chosen to do so. They've rejected the truth, and he's going to allow them to be in that position, and that's why they're going to be condemned. In fact, when we read in John chapter 3, when Jesus is talking to Nicodemus, and he's saying, that God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. People love that passage, but they need to go on to the next two verses because it says, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Whoever believes in him is not condemned, but whoever does not believe stands condemned already because he has not believed in the name of God's one and only Son. In other words, the truth has been told to people. They've chosen to ignore it. So what does this mean for you and I today? It means we have the truth of the Bible to read, to study, to grow, and to stand upon. And the truth always sets us free. I told you at the beginning of the week when I was talking about a friend who was deceived into believing some of the stuff about, the end times that he realized was misleading. And it took the Bible to get him back on track. And that's why we study the Bible. And that's why I know yesterday was long, but sometimes we dig in a little deeper because we need to know the truth, because the truth will set us free. That's a scriptural fact. It's a promise of Christ, and we can stand on that promise. And so when people stand up against the truth of the Bible, when you feel like you're alone and you're the only one believing, keep standing firm, because there is a time coming when judgment will happen. And if we want to be judged in blessing instead of in curses, then we need to stay focused in the Bible, growing in the Lord, and walking with him every day. And I hope that's what you do today, and I hope that's what you do every day as you journey this life and trek this life and grow closer to Christ.
That's today's Devo on Deep Treks. No matter how deep the questions or dark the doubts, there's always a path forward. Reach out at deeptreks.com with prayer needs or topics you'd like us to